We hate to be the ones to break it to you, but it turns out not everyone loves our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. While Peter Parker's web-slinging quips have earned him many fans, there are some villains out there who just can't take hearing yet another pop culture reference. That's right, we're talking about the Sinister Six, one of the most dastardly groups of villains in all of Marvel Comics. We'll get into everything you need to know about the Sinister Six, who may one day make their way into the MCU. It was clear that Spider-Man Homecoming was hinting at the Sinister Six possibly forming in the MCU. Well, at least it was to us. We saw all these Spider-Man villains who were a part of the notorious group in the film, and with the ending of Far From Home, we have all the reason to believe this group of baddies will be in the next Spider-Man film. So we'll let you know all about the villains who make up the Sinister Six. Of course, there's the Vulture, who we all recognize from Spider-Man Homecoming. Then we have some classic Spider-Man enemies, including the Chameleon, the Scorpion, and the Shocker. Of course, there's also one of the biggest, baddest, and most well-known of Spider-Man's enemies, the Green Goblin. We can practically hear ominous music playing every time we say the Green Goblin. Because Norman Osborn is the owner of the ultra-powerful company Oscorp that's apparently taking over what used to be the Stark Tower. Back in Homecoming, we saw Happy Hogan moving stuff out of there, but we didn't find out who the new owner would be. However, many of us guessed it would be Oscorp since it was surprising this comic book staple hadn't shown up in the MCU yet. We've also seen something similar happen in other Spider-Man media, including the Spider-Man video game for the PlayStation 4. The game starts out with Peter Parker taking down Kingpin, who warns him this'll just create a vacuum of power to be filled by someone less manageable. And although we hate to admit it, it turns out Kingpin was kinda right about that. In the MCU, Tony Stark perishing in Endgame definitely created a void of power, and it looks like it'll be filled by some people who aren't Spider-Man's biggest fans, to say the least. Who are the Sinister Six? Well, they're a group of sinister villains, and there are 6 of them. That concludes our video. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Okay. We'll share some slightly less obvious things about this group of supervillains. In the Avengers, we saw a group of heroes brought together to fight against a common enemy. There were some personality conflicts and differing strategies. We're looking at you, Tony and Steve. But they all managed to unite in order to work towards a common goal. That common goal, of course, was not seeing the world destroyed by aliens or taken over by Loki. The Sinister Six are a group of villains who are similarly united, but instead of saving the day, they just want to take out Spider-Man. You see, as you've probably noticed by now, Spider-Man is a hard bug to squash. Okay, we know Spider-Mans aren't really bugs, but let us have our artistic liberty here. Many of his greatest foes have come so close to defeating him, only to be thwarted at the last moment. Doctor Octopus is one such villain who has had enough of losing to Spider-Man, and realizes that if he had some capable help, he might be able to defeat him once and for all. We're sure you know who Doctor Octopus is, because he's one of Spider-Man's most prolific villains. We even got to see a female Doc Ock in the movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, voiced by Kathryn Hahn. Otto Octavius is a brilliant man who was brought up by 2 horrible parents. His trademark tentacles were designed to allow him to handle radioactive materials safely back before he had started his career in supervillainy. Being a villain isn't easy, especially when some jabroni in a mask keeps showing up to foil your plans. Doc Ock realized Spider-Man was the biggest impediment to his schemes, and decided he'd stop at nothing to take him down. He managed to find 5 other morally dubious people willing to listen to a crazy guy with metal tentacles: Electro, Kraven the Hunter, Mysterio, Sandman, and Vulture. Electro is a villain we've seen on the big screen before, but not in a movie produced by Marvel Studios. He appeared in the movie The Amazing Spider-Man 2, played by Jamie Foxx. In this movie, Maxwell Dillon started out as a big fan of Spider-Man who got into a terrible accident involving a tank of genetically modified electric eels. Like Doc Ock, Max ends up with both powers and brain damage, and eventually turns against Spider-Man. In the comic books, Maxwell Dillon was yet another villain with an unhappy childhood. His father left his mother for another woman, and his mother lied and told him he got rejected from an electrical engineering program. So Max settled on becoming a lineman for the electric company, which eventually caused his wife to leave him for, wait for it, an electrical engineer. Oh, cruel fate. What are the odds of that? Well, probably about the same as getting struck by lightning, because that happens to him as well. Max ends up with electrical powers and becomes Electro, a villain who's out for monetary gain and is frequently thwarted by Spider-Man and the help of some rubber gloves. Now our next member of the Sinister Six, Kraven the Hunter, is someone we have not seen on the big screen, and quite frankly, we're salty about it. Kraven's real name is Sergei Kravenov, and he's a hunter who eschews traditional weapons most of the time in favor of his bare hands. Oh yeah, and a witch doctor hooks him up with a potion which enhances his physical prowess. Eventually, he decided the most dangerous game isn't man, but rather Spider-Man, and vows to take him down. Of course, we also have Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, in the original lineup. After watching Spider-Man Far From Home, you probably have a good idea of who this guy is. In the comics, we're introduced to Quentin Beck, a talented guy who wants more fame and recognition. He decides the best way to do this is to defeat Spider-Man, and in his defense, the plan kinda works. Well, not in the actually defeated Spider-Man sense, but it did make him more famous. Famous for being the guy that tried to take out Spider-Man and failed, but still. He has a serious grudge against our pal Spidey, so he was only too happy to join the Sinister Six. Sandman is another villain we've seen on the big screen, but not in the MCU. He appeared in the 2007 movie Spider-Man 3, and his origin story was pretty similar to the one in the comic books. In the comic books, the Earth 616 version of Sandman is named William Baker, and his story starts out surprisingly wholesome. He was just a sweet kid who liked to build sand castles and gradually transitioned to more permanent mediums. He was the victim of bullying until he decided to become a bully himself. This leads to him committing petty crimes, which eventually puts him in the same prison as his father. Not wanting his identity to be revealed, he called himself Flint Marko, and as soon as he got out of prison, he returned to his life of crime. There are a few different versions of how he got his sand-based powers, but they mostly involve radiation and a whole lot of sand. The Vulture is a character most of us recognize from Spider-Man Homecoming, where we learned Adrian Toomes was driven to a life of crime following the fallout from the Battle of New York. He turned to dealing illegal weapons to support his family, which is actually a more compelling motivation than he has in the comic books. There, he invents a flying harness and decides to commit crimes because, hey, crimes is fun. So, there they are, the original members of the aptly named Sinister Six: Doctor Octopus, Electro, Kraven the Hunter, Mysterio, Sandman, and the Vulture. As their first evil act, they kidnap poor Aunt May and Daily Bugle secretary Betty Brant. They're promptly defeated by Spider-Man, who makes fun of them for banding together to defeat him. He's just jealous he didn't get an invite to their cool exclusive club. Their club may be cool, but it has a really high turnover rate. Doc Ock figures out pretty quickly that there's a reason villains usually work alone or with henchmen. It's like herding cats, and angry cats with superpowers at that. They've lost members due to defection or demise, but there are always new people waiting to join up to defeat Spider-Man. Villains aren't really great at learning from their mistakes, and eventually the group expands to the Sinister Seven and even the Sinister 12. You can tell the latter group is truly unadulterated evil because they even sacrifice their alliterative title for the chance to take down Spider-Man. The Sinister 12 is formed by Norman Osborn, who we all know from Sony's Spider-Man movies. He's a brilliant, wealthy, and powerful man who happens to lose it after being involved in a lab accident, turning him into the Green Goblin. His son Harry Osborn was Peter Parker's best pal at one point before he too lost it and resorted to becoming a supervillain. The Chameleon is one of Norman's recruits, and he's actually the first villain our masked web-slinger ever faced on the pages of the comic books. Yes, Dmitry Smerdyakov was right there in The Amazing Spider-Man #1. As you've probably guessed, he's great at blending in, using his own acting skills along with costumes and makeup. The group has another electricity-based enemy named Herman Schultz, also known as the Shocker, who we met in Homecoming. Herman was pretty much your garden variety criminal who kicked it up a notch by getting his hands on a pair of gauntlets capable of delivering a serious electrical punch. Another Homecoming alum is Mac Gagnon, also known as the Scorpion. He's the one we see question Vulture about the rumor that he knows Spider-Man's identity, making it clear he has a grudge against him. In the comics, he's a private investigator hired by Spider-Man's biggest fan, J. Jonah Jameson, to unmask him. Along the way, he takes part in an experiment, which left him with some scorpion-based powers, but at the cost of his sanity. While all of these villains represent a clear and present danger to our pal Peter, Norman Osborn is our pick for the most hazardous. Not only is he a strong supervillain, but his access to resources is enormous. In the comic books, he not only funds his own vendetta against Spider-Man, but the efforts of his fellow villains. His company, Oscorp, has power on an institutional level, and with Stark Industries gone, we have a feeling he's going to be more or less unopposed by anyone but Spider-Man himself. To say this could be disastrous for the MCU is a bit of an understatement. Well, what do you think about the possibility of the Sinister Six joining the MCU? Do you think it's too much, or are you excited to see this supervillain team getting their time to shine? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section below, and then click on the subscribe button for more videos from CBR. Bye for now.